Good afternoon and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines and the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, today we're going to have the pleasure to meet the man who's responsible for keeping the lights on in New Haven. And that is not as easy a job as it sounds this time of year. That's what we're going to talk about. Say good afternoon to Franklyn D. Reynolds, the president of United Illuminating. Welcome to Dateline New Haven, Frank, and thanks so much for making time.
Paul, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
And just to get all the bookkeeping right, UI is division of Avangrid. Do I say it right?
Yeah, Avangrid was formed back in 2015. It was a merger between Iberdrola USA and the United Illuminating Company. So Avangrid became the company back in 2015. It's traded on the New York Stock Exchange.
And for those of us who've been in New Haven a million years, we might not have caught up with the fact that it's not just the electric company, UI, it's all the Southern Connecticut Gas and Connecticut Natural Gas, and you're also part of Berkshire Gas. You have 1,500 employees, right?
Yep. Roughly 1,500 employees. I actually started my career at Southern Connecticut Gas, so great to be a part of that company again, because I was in New York for a few years. But yes, so Avangrid has 8 utilities that operate in the northeastern states. So there's 2 utilities in New York State Electric and Gas, Rochester Gas and Electric. And then there's a utility in Maine called Central Maine Power. And then, as you mentioned here, we've got the utilities here in Connecticut.
Frank, you're bailiwick, you're president of the group UI that has natural gas electricity to 765,000 customers. And that's Connecticut and Mass?
Yeah, Connecticut and Mass. So the 3 companies here in Connecticut, as well as Berkshire Gas up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
So the pressure's on you. You look relaxed, but I have a feeling that in the coming weeks, you might not be so relaxed because people are worried about the grid. They're worried about superstorms, climate change. We have more superstorms than ever. And I didn't know about this until you guy Gage Frank showed me the other day. ISO New England, which runs the grid for the whole region, put out a really concerning warning on December 6th. It said that for a bunch of reasons, natural gas pipelines, supply chains, weather, we might be having high risk for keeping the lights on all the time during this winter, that if there are big storms, they think there might be rolling blackouts. And that's the same word as controlled outages. That's just the term of art.
Yeah, essentially it is. Yeah, and
have we had those in the past, Frank? And
yeah, not to my knowledge. Certainly, UI has never had like a controlled outage, to my understanding, and I'm not aware of any blackouts that ever actually happened here in the region. And so, just so folks are aware, I mean, because one of the things we don't want people to panic. ISO puts this out every year. It got a little bit more attention, I think, this year because they use some different channels to put the word out. But every year they put out what they call their winter outlook, where they talk about, their winter forecasts. And this particular year, they said, there's a possibility of, controlled outages or blackouts, as you mentioned there. So, in response to that, one of the things that we're trying to do here at the company is, one, make sure that we're raising their awareness. And so I appreciate you having me on to talk a little bit about this and you getting the word out to your listeners. But, we're trying to raise awareness, but not raise panic. We want people to be aware of the situation that ISO's talked about here in terms of the potential of controlled outages. We want them to be prepared. Of course, we want our customers to be prepared. And we want to be prepared as well, in terms of mitigating the impact to our customers. So, of course, we're planning, we plan and drill outages like this anyway. It's just a part of our normal DNA, just like we prepare for storms. But we're also doing some outreach initially. So we've been talking with a number of towns that we serve, all the towns that we serve. We've been talking with the emergency management professionals within the respective towns, such as Rick Fontana, in New Haven is the started first.
The face of emergency management.
I had a brief discussion. Rick's a great guy, by the way, but had a brief discussion with the mayor as well back in December when the notice came out, just again to raise awareness. I was on with Mayor Carfora over in East Haven just yesterday.
So Frank, before you go further, can I just clarify something you said?
Yeah.
You said that ISO puts out warnings every year. This one happened to get more traction because we're talking about climate change. We watched what happened in Texas. We watched what happened with the wildfires in California.
Yeah.
Was this forecast different? Is there more of a chance of this year, or is this like any other year?
Well, I think part of the thing that's going on, so a couple of things I'd say there. One is we're actually forecasting to have a warmer than normal winter this year. So, and what ISO was trying to point out is if we had a polar vortex like we had back in, I think it was 2013, 14, where we had, I don't know, a number of days of extremely cold temperatures, there's a possibility where you would have what they call an energy deficiency or capacity deficiency. So one of the things that might be instigating it this year is every year off the coast of Massachusetts, there are LNG tankers that sit off the coast of Massachusetts.
Liquefied natural gas.
Liquefied natural gas that supplement the power generation into the region. Of course, a lot of our power generation in the region is fueled from natural gas. And so they've always had, the supplemental LNG that sits off the coast. This year, because of COVID, supply chain issues, things of that nature, some of those tankers are being diverted due to price, quite frankly, over to Europe. They're taking a higher price, going over to Europe and selling some of that LNG. So I believe ISO was a little bit concerned that, if we do get into a really cold stretch of temperatures, they may not have enough energy, to generate the power that's needed in terms of meeting customer demand.
So listening to you, I'm getting a different picture. It's not that this thing happening this year. Yeah, there are always factors every year. This year's supply chain, other years it's colder than normal. But we are in a new normal. You cited a year of 2013, 2014. I'd actually dial it back to 2011. As a reporter, I got the sense that the storm picture changed around that time, that something clicked in with reaching a point in maybe climate change. So when Ella Grasso was governor in the 70s and early 80s, she had one storm that defined her legacy, one blizzard. She was there at the emergency center. She was tough Ella getting us through. Dan Malloy was elected in 2010. He had 3 of those storms in a year. We had a Halloween ice storm that was a surprise that knocked out power. We had, I guess it was 2013, the biggest snowstorm in over a century, Snowmageddon, with 3 feet of snow. But it wasn't the only one. Even in 2011, there was storm after storm we couldn't dig out. Are we in a new normal where utility companies like yours have to do a lot more work, keep the lights on than you used to because of climate change?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Paul, you're spot on. I mean, there's something going on with the climate. These storms are more frequent and they're definitely more violent. They're definitely more intense. And so there's a number of things that we certainly are doing to make our grid more resilient, right? We're using, I'll say, a higher class of poles to withstand higher wind speeds. We're using different kinds of cable to, again, not fall just because a tree branch falls on it or comes in contact with it. We're looking at selective undergrounding of circuits where it makes sense. Of course, that's extremely expensive, but of course, if it increases the reliability, we want to make sure that happens. And let me just say, as a tangentially to that, we have some of the best power quality at UI across the country. We're top quartile. Our customers have less than 1 outage per year on a normal basis, right? Blue sky day, if you will.
I'm not going to say this out loud, but we've never had an outage in the last 20 years of in this house, but they have had them 3 blocks away. We think we have some kind of lucky UI box or something.
Gotcha. Yeah, but to a broader scale, I will say Avangrid. So Avangrid also has a renewable business, right? So I'm in the utilities portion of the business, but there's also a renewables business, which our CEO, Dennis Ariola, oversees the entire business. And, one of the things that, we're doing there is we're the #3 wind power producer in the country already. We were just awarded one of the first utility scale offshore wind projects off the coast of Massachusetts called Vineyard Wind. That's going to be coming on.
And I wanted to get to that, Frank, because we
talked about I don't mean to get into
I appreciate that you brought it up and you anticipated where I was going. One is I want to talk about the nuts and bolts of now, which is your job, and then the nuts and bolts of later. And we're talking to Franklyn D. Reynolds. He's the president of United Illuminating Division of Avangrid. He's the man who keeps the power on for Connecticut. So on the one hand, if I'm hearing you right, we don't have to worry more this year than other years, but we have to be more on alert than we ever were because of the changing nature of our climate and more superstorms. We watched what happened in Texas when the grid failed spectacularly. And so you said you want to raise awareness. What do you want people to know as winter sets in? Like we're supposed to have 6 inches Friday.
Yeah. We're supposed to have a little bit of snow tomorrow, but we just want people to be aware. We want them to be connected to us. So we've got a number of ways that we communicate with customers these days, as you do. We've got social media, right? We've got the Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got our Facebook page that we also use. And of course, we've just got information right out on our website for customers to go out and take a look at. And we use all of those means of communications to make sure that customers are aware. And as I mentioned before, just because of the heightened awareness of around the situation that ISO has brought, we're talking with our municipalities just to make sure we are in lockstep with them and they are in lockstep with us in terms of, okay, if it really gets bad, what are we going to do? Let's make sure we have a plan that we can execute on just so we mitigate the impact to our customers, their constituents, to the best of our ability. So
why don't you walk me through a rolling blackout, or as you call it, controlled outage? First of all, you're saying it's not likely it would happen this winter, but you have to be ready.
We have to be ready, right? We have to be ready. So it depending on, and we would take direction from ISO, just to give you a little bit more background, Paul. ISO controls the grid. The last thing that they want to happen to the grid, the transmission grid that is for it to collapse. So they need to keep it in balance at all times. If it collapses, then we're talking about blackouts everywhere and a very long time to get the grid back up. We control the distribution system so that, from the transmission network, distribution system that goes out to your house, as you just pointed out, or out to the businesses and communities that we serve. So if there is a chance that ISO says, one, we need to reduce demand on the system, there's a couple things that can happen. One is automatically the system, our system, will start reducing voltages and nobody will see what happens, right? That will be pretty much invisible to customers. They won't see that except for some high-end customers that have some really sensitive equipment, some laboratories, things of that nature. They may see it, but they'll be able to mitigate the impact as well. So we could reduce voltages to reduce some of that demand. Customers will never see that. The more invasive, right, situation is where we would actually have to implement the rolling blackouts or the controlled outages, where we would reduce power based on ISO asking us to reduce power or demand on particular circuits for a particular time frame. Exactly how long, I'm not sure, because it really depends on what ISO would ask us to do. It could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be extended, but we would rotate those blackouts so that customers aren't impacted longer than necessarily. They could repower their phones, turn the heat back on, get warm, and then they may possibly have another blackout or controlled outage for a period of time. Does that answer your question? To give you some clarity?
So in other words, you'd wait to see whether ISO is saying you need to have it. It sounds like they make the call that you got to do control.
Yeah, they make the call.
And then you say the first step you do then is to figure out how to spread it around. And you have the capacity to have certain parts get it for a while and certain other parts. You thinking like 3 hours at a time, or how does it work?
Well, it depends, right? It could be less than that. It could be more than that. It really depends on how much of an imbalance ISO has and requests us to, respond to.
And then communication, as you mentioned, is crucial. What I've noticed in the last 2 years is more citizens are getting familiar with the spot on your website where you give minute-to-minute updates on where power is out. I notice on Facebook, people will say, here's the link to the UI page, and you're putting it out for everybody. It's almost, I kind of like that you've gotten rid of us as the middleman. Yeah, it's localized. People find it out that way. Yeah, so is that the next part, that you get the word out to people? Can you do it in advance? Say we're about to put down the...
Yeah, absolutely. As much advance notice as possible. And we do have an app on top of all of the other mentions that I made in terms of modes of communication. So ISO does a 21-day look ahead. So they kind of forecast their demand capacity 21 days out. And so best case scenario, if they see something 21 days out, they can let us know, hey, we may have an energy capacity issue in 21 days. And we would, in accordance to that, respond and start notifying customers. Hey, 21 days from now, we may have one of these situations that I just made mention of. Or it could be a little bit more immediate. You talked about Texas. Those guys had no time at all. Of course, they have an entirely different system. I will say they are isolated, where we're interconnected with New York ISO as well as some other surrounding ISOs. So we could import power, or ISO could import power.
But they're the size of a country, Texas. So
Yeah, this is
it's
true.
like,
They're out there, and then their system also isn't built for that type of weather that they have. So they don't have the weatherization that we have here in the Northeast. But yeah, so that's exactly what would transpire there.
so now what else do you want citizens to do? Do you want them to have backup generators and water, or do you think that's overdoing it?
Well, I think, it's kind of preparing. I wouldn't say go out and buy generators or anything like that. It's kind of preparing like you would for a storm in terms of making sure you've got your non-perishable food, water, as you just mentioned there. You're charging your phone. But again, we would provide as much notice as possible. As much notice as we receive, we would provide. Again, that's why we're going out already well in advance of anything occurring and talking with the various municipalities just to make sure that they understand what our plan is. We understand what their plan is. We're in lockstep to make sure that we
And
protect.
bottom line, you're not particularly worried about this winter, but you're ready.
We're ready. We're always ready. We're always ready.
And we're talking today with Franklyn Reynolds, president of United Illuminating, talking about what's going on with UI. And now we're going to talk about the second part of preparing for these big storms. So it sounds like you think it is accurate to say in the last 10 years, the game has changed in Connecticut with power, and you've had to increase the strength of your cables and one thing I want to ask one more on that. You mentioned underground. So one big debate that happens every few years in the Independent is people saying, why don't we have underground electric wires so that you're not up on poles, they don't get blown down, they don't get hit by the trees. It's incredibly expensive. How realistic is it? Would we have to bond for how many billions to do
Oh my
that?
gosh. Yeah, I can't even put a price tag on that off the top of my head, but you're right. It's incredibly expensive. And there's a couple of things there. You just mentioned trees on our power lines. And so if you think about undergrounding lines, which, we've done in certain areas, finding a fault on an underground line is very difficult because it's underground. You can't see it. You've got to do some analysis, which our team is we've got an extremely capable group of folks that are dedicated, obviously, to providing great service, but pinpointing exactly where that is extremely difficult.
Is that because you have to be a certain amount above sea level? You have to not have tree roots and rocks. You don't have to, what are the issues?
It's just because it's buried. It's quite simple. I would make, I don't mean to overcomplicate it at all. It's buried. You can't see exactly where there might be a break in the line versus, oh, I see there's a limb on that line. The line snapped. I know exactly where I need to go fix it.
Now, but other parts of the country do have more buried, right? Like in the Midwest, don't they, like Minneapolis?
Yeah, there's other parts of the country that may have more buried, but I have to tell you, there's at some point, the lines are above ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
At some point, the transmission lines are above ground. If those lines get impacted, they're going to impact the underground lines as well. One of the things that we're looking at, though, is selective undergrounding. So, we're going to be conducting some pilots to see, is it cost prohibitive? You factor in the cost of restoration. Does it make it, or is it cost beneficial to, do the selective undergrounding in parts of our system without having those exorbitant costs, impact ratepayers? Of course, we want to make sure that, energy continues to be affordable in the region.
I heard a rumor that they're printing insane amounts of money in Washington to send for infrastructure. Could this fund any of that realistically, or is it just too many years in advance, too many other competing emergencies?
A lot of the infrastructure monies that I've understood so far, some of it does go to resiliency, energy resiliency, but it's also looking at new technologies, like advancing hydrogen, which is something that we're also looking at. We responded to the Department of Energy earlier this year. We put in a proposal for a hydrogen project. We've talked to the governor here in the state. Our CEOs talked with him about making Connecticut a hydrogen hub, for the region. So there's a lot of promise just because of the offshore wind industry that's building up here in Connecticut for us to be able to advance hydrogen technology as a form of energy in the region.
Tell me about that. That's supposed to be carbon neutral or not?
Yeah, no, it's carbon neutral. So there's a few things that you can do, right? You can decarbonize the natural gas system. You can blend hydrogen into the natural gas system. You can use hydrogen to power vehicles, whether it be, longer range vehicles. It's something also that's being looked at. You can use it to power maritime. You can use it to decarbonize what we call high intense industries that use a lot of energy. And you can use clean hydrogen, right? You can generate it from offshore wind. Again, we're in that business as well, at least our renewables company. is in the offshore wind business, as I mentioned before. So you can use it to generate green hydrogen that can then, again, do all those things that I just mentioned.
Okay, and again, I'd like you to, if you can explain to me, you can explain to anybody because I'm ignorant about this stuff. You mentioned green hydrogen. So obviously, anytime you create energy that sounds like it's not, that it's carbon neutral, to get there can be difficult. Like car batteries. The mining involved, the mining process to create batteries to make your car green could be quite polluting.
Yeah,
Tell me what you mean for the layperson. What
yeah,
it means to create green hydrogen through a process like offshore wind, which you're involved in, and how that could then be taken to a factory or to the pump for a car to make to decarbonize our energy.
yeah. So I'm going to try and use the best of my ability to do this. So you've got offshore wind that generates green electricity. That electricity can be coming from offshore wind, brought onshore and run through an electrolysis, which splits out the hydrogen atom. You take that hydrogen, that clean green hydrogen, because it's built off of that green wind, that clean wind, and you can blend it into the natural gas system. You can utilize it for heavy use industries, heavy energy industries. You can use it for the maritime. You can use it to power vehicles. I know there's some companies already that are looking at, medium-sized trucks for hydrogen, because you can get up to 600 to maybe 1,000 miles of range on that. So that's what green hydrogen is. Did I hit the nail on the head?
That makes sense.
Perfect.
Even I understand that.
Okay.
So how do you want to get there? This pilot you're proposing, how many dollars, who would fund it, when would it happen, how would it work?
Yeah, so you mentioned, the Biden bill. So they've got what they call the Earth Shot Initiative, or the Hydrogen Shot Initiative, where they're looking for a number of use cases across the country. We happen to be, in my opinion, we've got a geographical advantage because of the offshore wind industry that's building up off the coast of Massachusetts or New England here. And we also have, the perfect opportunity to bring that clean hydrogen into our region because of those use cases. We've got the perfect use case in an area, just in the Bridgeport area, actually, to hit on all those different use cases. So by being able to hit on
use the term use cases, meaning ways it can be done. You mentioned the cars and the factories, and okay.
Yeah, we could do it all within a very tight region in a particular area that we actually own and operate, which would be great for the region. It'd just be fantastic for the region. And
so this is an initiative that's part of the infrastructure bill, where different areas of the country will compete for dollars to test out how to bring clean hydrogen.
Exactly.
So a broader effort to decarbonize our energy sector.
You got it.
So you got a proposal in for that, or does it need to be submitted by the governor?
Yeah, no, we've submitted one. It was late last fall that we submitted one to the DOP.
And I'm sorry, to whom?
The Department of Energy.
And how does that stand?
So I don't know off the top of my head the timeline, but I believe sometime in first quarter, maybe second quarter of this year, we should have an update in terms of the status and kind of next steps.
And how much would it cost? How much are you looking for?
I think it was probably, I'm going to say it's around 100 million in round numbers.
And then when would you be able to get on the ground if they say yes? Because one of the big things about the infrastructure bill, when I'm thinking back on after Obama had the post-recession bill to get shovel-ready projects, and nothing was shovel-ready, it took 4 years. Is this realistically something you could get started on before the next year is over?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, because we would be using some of that offshore wind, right? Some of the energy generated by that offshore wind. The Vineyard Wind project that I made mention of is supposed to come online next year. Park City Wind a few years later. Those industries that I made mention of is they're right there, right? They're ready to receive potentially some of this.
So you just mentioned that you have 2 offshore wind projects. You said Vineyard Wind project. And is that an Avangrid project?
Yeah, that's an Avangrid project. So I don't want to confuse it with UI. It's not United Illuminating. It's our parent company, Avangrid.
And what's the second one?
And Park City Wind. So Park City Wind is headquartered right in Bridgeport.
And that's going second.
Right. Somewhat simultaneously, but second, yes.
And lastly, this isn't what's happening in the office you're sitting in now, or the one in New Haven, which is your parent company, Iberdrola. I was reading in the New York Times, is a world leader in wind power. So what you're doing here is part. They made the bet actually 15 years ago, was it,
Yeah,
to
maybe even
invest
20.
quicker?
Yeah, 20 years ago. I mean, they really were, they're thought leaders in this space. They've got a number of offshore wind projects around the globe, as you just mentioned. They are the world leader in this area. And so we definitely leverage that expertise as we put Vineyard Wind and Park City Wind forward, and other technologies. They're also doing things with hydrogen already over there in Europe that, we'll learn from them, learn from some of our.
They have a Danish partner, so yeah.
Yep.
And so Frank Reynolds, if you got another call just now and you put me on hold and it's President Biden or Governor Lamont saying, what have we got done right in this pursuit of greener energy future? And what have we not gotten right? How should we pivot? What would be your advice based on the experience you folks have had?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things to that. One is I think we've done a good job of enabling that market to start growing and flourishing, right? By having that competitive bid process, you're getting a lot of technology, right? We just got the first utility scale offshore wind project here, which is going to be big for the area. So I think we've done that right, and that's going to be good for consumers because by going through that competitive process, you get the lowest price for that really clean energy. So that's fantastic. I think where we need additional effort, though, is in the transmission line siting process, because you got to take that clean energy and get it into the load pocket areas, right? The areas that need it, the New Havens that need it, the Bridgeports and so forth that need it. So that process can be quite timely. And quite frankly, folks can slow that process down through a number of ways. So I think we need to fix that process, quite frankly.
So the process involves, like we've looked at other kinds of energy transmission, oil pipelines through native lands and other parts of the country, and environmental destruction. Are those issues the same here? No one really feels sorry for people in Cape Cod who don't want wind farms because they don't want to spoil their view. But are there issues when you go through dense populated places?
It's very similar, Paul. I'll call it NIMBYism in general, right? People just don't want it in their backyard. Even if it's clean energy, right? Bringing it into a particular area. We just had a project, our Central Maine Power, NECEC, New England Clean Energy Connect project, that was going to bring 1,000 megawatts of power down into New England, into Massachusetts. And, it got tied up in the courts for a long period here. And I think it's still in the courts, but, you would think something like that's going to benefit the future, bring clean energy jobs, reduce our carbon emissions, would just fly through and be a slam dunk. But
so I assume that every time you take on a project, you're building in time for legal challenges, citizen changes. How would you, if you're giving that advice to the governor or the president, what would you recommend? Would you recommend expedited approval process? Would you limit the criteria on which, because sometimes it's pure NIMBYism and sometimes it's really legitimate, right? We didn't want to destroy native lands or and fishing for native tribes, which are not the issues here. What would you take off the table and what would you keep on the table?
Yeah, well, I think certainly taking off the table is the opportunity in a thoughtful way, Paul, right? In a very thoughtful way, the opportunity to stop these projects from progressing when they can have such a benefit to, the country as a whole, the climate as a whole, and certainly the region at the end of the day. So those are the types of things I think that you got to take off the table. But keeping on the table is, continuing to push forward these renewable portfolio standards where you want more and more clean energy. We just need to be extremely thoughtful and pragmatic about making this transition, right? We need to make the transition as the technology becomes available.
So I think that's a real challenge for the climate change movement. Because if they want greener energy, it's often the same people, and that's not saying the same people in a negative way, in a good way, who care about the environment. So the same person who wants to make sure they're preserving trees and clean air and clean water also is saying there's a climate emergency. We got to get this green energy done yesterday. So it's kind of tough. I saw that similar debate a generation ago with nuclear power. Because like you look at Fred Krupp and some of the other environmental leaders using the Environmental Defense Fund, he actually said nuclear power should be considered green again. It was initially embraced by the environmental movement. Then it became the bête noire of the environmental movement because of how poorly it was underregulated, overseen, and the dangers. And now it's being embraced now by some, including some nations, and then not others. I think Germany didn't. They stopped the nuclear power. So like it was. Yeah. These are tough questions, but I think
really are.
You're right that they have to be on the table. If you want to have a green future, what choices are we going to make?
Yeah, many years ago, somebody said, the energy strategy ought to be all the above.
Mhm.
And people kind of said, what, that's not a strategy. Well, I'm starting to think it might be, because you've got to consider all these different types of energy because each of them, to your point earlier, right? Solar farms take up a lot of space. Wind farms take up a lot of space.
Yeah, that's the only NIMBY I think nobody sympathizes with the people on Cape Cod and those women. But then there's some, your predecessors, 2 generations back, not at UI, but Millstone. There was a feeling that there wasn't enough regulatory oversight, that the companies put the public in danger because they were too cozy with what used to be the Department of Public Utilities Control in terms of making sure those safeties in place. Do you think, in addition to the citizens movements, environmentalists being more honest and confronting the trade-offs they're willing to make for climate change, do you think there's any role for corporations involved in energy transmission and creation to be more transparent and more open? It's a leading question. More transparent and more open to regulation too. Like, does everybody have to give something here?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. I mean, and we've got we're doing everything in terms of when we evaluate our investments. We use what we call this ES&G lens, right? Environmental, social, societal, and governance approach to all the investments that we make on all of our systems. And so we're trying to be as transparent as we need to be ahead of being asked to be in terms of the approach that we're taking.
All right, take it. We're talking to Franklyn Reynolds, president of United Illuminating, which is in charge of our electric company, our gas company, natural gas, and he's here on Dateline New Haven at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio. So you grew up in Connecticut. Where did you grow up in state?
Yeah, I grew up in Bloomfield.
In Bloomfield. Okay.
Yeah. So I was actually born in Jamaica, but I grew up here outside of Hartford in Bloomfield. Graduated from Bloomfield High. I went to Central Connecticut State University. I went to University of New Haven down the road from you for my MBA. I was in the Army National Guard here for 20 years. I was enlisted for a while, and I went to officer school, and I eventually became a major. Commanded a few units here in the state. Actually, the AG of the state right now is one of my former classmates,
William Tong.
Fran Yvonne.
Oh, Fran Yvonne.
General Yvonne. So, I'm basically, although not born here, raised here for sure.
Did you go to what year did you graduate Bloomfield High?
85.
So you were before Chef. You were about 10 years before Chef.
Yeah.
Was that a reality, an issue for you there? Or I guess Bloomfield was considered a pretty model high school, right?
Yeah, I enjoyed my time there. I absolutely enjoyed my time there. And, I did just in my rounds around the company here, I spent 14 years out of the state in New York working with NYSEG, RG&E, as well as Central Maine Power, working with some of our other utilities. And, so I've just been back for the past 3 years. And
when
great.
You're rising in an industry like energy and you're in the Army National Guard, how do you balance that? There must have been some pretty serious time commitments and some time leaves of absence, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And,
Tell me about that.
Fortunately, the company has a great policy. It's extremely supportive of all the veterans. In fact, we've got a business resource group, Avon Veterans, where all of our vets, and including myself, we get together once a month. We talk about different things that, as a community, right? As a community within a community, so to speak. So now we've got some supportive policies, for our veterans that need to take that leave of absence and go, serve our nation. So
why did you want to do that? Why did you decide at the same time that you're embarking on a career in public energy that you also were going to make this major commitment to the National Guard? What motivated you to do that?
I've always, I wanted to serve our nation to the best of my ability. And I thought, that level of service was the best way to do it. And then I was just drawn to the structure. I love the structure of the military, the camaraderie of the military, and exactly what we do. I mean, we help people in need, right? That's what we do. And that's the same thing that we do in the utility space. We provide an essential service to our customers. And every day, we've got a great team of folks, whether it's on the gas side of the business or the electric side of the business, that are focused on doing that. And so very similar to the military. Just very dedicated.
I know what you mean about that sense of mission. I know when there's superstorms in New Haven, we have our emergency operations center, which is like deep basement with the freeze-dried rations if the nuclear bombs come, all this. But there's UI at one desk, and there's the police department, the fire department, there's the parks people, and they're all coordinating, and it's all this sense together
Yeah,
of we're going to help a community get through a tough time. Can you tell me
absolutely.
about some of the missions you were involved with the National Guard where you had
Oh
to take a
gosh,
break?
yeah. I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, certainly we were mobilized. During Iraq, the first couple of wars, we were mobilized. We never deployed over. At least the units that I was a part of, we never deployed over. But we were mobilized and at the ready station, ready to go, and then we never had to deploy. I was attached to Fort Drum, the Mountain Division up in Fort Drum, the 10th Mountain Division Infantry. So did a lot of exercises up there. I happen to be a nuclear warfare officer, so nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare officer after I got my commission. So again, a lot of exercise there. Out
What did you
to
do as a nuclear biological warfare? Did you actually
So
have to deploy?
we have a defensive posture, right? And we have a no force use kind of position in the military. So it was all about just making sure we could protect ourselves from any forms of contamination, whether it be biological, nuclear, except or some type of chemical attack.
Any okay, here's the wild question of the day. Any thoughts on Havana syndrome? You read the story every 7 weeks or every 2 months, and it's always a little story in the newspaper, and you think, this is like some kind of mystery horror movie, some crazy sci-fi thing. I mean, what do you think's going on with that, given your background?
So I apologize. I'm going to plead ignorant on that one. I've missed it.
Where all the people in the embassy in Cuba came down with these weird
Hmm.
illnesses, and they actually had to stop public government service.
Oh,
And there
geez.
was all these different theories about whether there was some kind of biological or chemical weaponry used or some kind of audio shock. And now it's turned up in a couple of embassies around the world, and there's a US military commission that's been looking into it. It's the kind of thing that's like on page A10
Yeah.
next to the big story about the storm. But your background, there are people with your background who are trying to solve this mystery. It's been a few years now.
Yeah, no, I'll have to look into that one.
Okay.
Fortunately, they didn't call me out of retirement for that one.
So before we let you go, and I appreciate all this update, anything else you want us to know about preparing for the winter in terms of UI customers? Is there a certain website or a certain app you want people to download or any kind of mailing
Yeah,
list you
no,
want?
I appreciate the question, Paul. I mean, I would definitely encourage folks to download our app. Our app has got a lot of information on there. It's a great way to communicate with us. But I always ask customers, we always ask customers to use energy wisely, use it efficiently. It's good for the environment. It's good for the pocketbook. It also will help in this particular situation that ISO is raising. It will help to alleviate a bit this potential demand capacity issue that might come to pass this winter here. So those are the things I would make mention of. Again, be able to connect with us, get our social media sites out there, and give us feedback. I've always asked for
Any
feedback.
particular website you want them to go to? Just the UI website,
Yeah,
UIL?
yep, UINet, and they'll get that information out there. There's a lot of great information out there again around energy efficiency. There it is, right? Thank you for putting it out there, Gage. A lot of great information around energy efficiency, and again, storm preparedness for this,
I do
winter.
have one last question. One person involved in the industry once suggested to me that the future is going to be in microgrids. That in my neighborhood there should be 3 blocks that has a generator everyone's shared, or solar power that doesn't go back into a grid with someone getting lost and coming back. Is that realistic, or is the economies of scale too out of whack?
So here's the thing. I would say two things there. One is we have a microgrid. We have one in Woodbridge that we have some critical infrastructure on. But I think there's a possibility, but there's always going to be the need for the grid, right? So that power that you generate that you could consume on your own, you may want to sell it back to somebody out in California or some other part of the system, or putting it back out on the grid where it could be used elsewhere. So I think we'll always need the grid to move that power around, but you could definitely have that kind of microgrid set up.
So is that another tension, like we're talking about the environmentalists having to realize there are choices to be made about how we are in a connected world? There's no way around it. It makes us more vulnerable to attacks, right? Like I'm sure you guys every 5 minutes are detecting a new attempted hack into your systems, and that the microgrid, you're losing economies of scale, you're protected from attacks, but we need each other. So as superstorms knock out power in California or New York or New Hampshire, we've got to help each other with the power, and also the workers. During the last storms I saw, we had people going from Massachusetts to New York.
Yeah, no, again, it's that's sense of mission again, where folks want to help folks in need. I mean, we sent people down to Louisiana last summer after ECS, or after the storm that came through Ida last summer, to help people out. They were down there for a long period of time. So all about that sense of mission and getting people back on. But yes, it is a shared responsibility. We are connected. We need to take care of each other like that.
Hope COVID might leave some of that legacy in the world, though. I'm not sure. Franklyn Reynolds, such a pleasure to have you today on Dateline New Haven. Thank you for making the time, and thanks for having that sense of mission to keep
Absolutely.
us connected and keeping the lights on. Here's the fingers crossed that it's going to be a good winter.
Yeah, knocking on wood here. Everybody else can do the same. Appreciate it, Paul.
And thank you to Harry Drost for station manager at WNHH. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long here. WNHH, Haven's home for community radio.
Change is a public health emergency. That's the name of a panel to be presented on Zoom by the Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization on Sunday, January 16th from 4 to 6 p.m. Panelists will discuss the links between public health and climate change, the disparate impacts on marginalized communities, climate solutions that are working in Connecticut, and actions you can take in your local community. Go to ctclimatecrisismobilization.org/events to register. The forum will offer simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. El cambio climático es una emergencia de salud pública. Ese es el nombre de un panel que se presentará en Zoom por la movilización contra la crisis climática de Connecticut, el domingo 16 de enero de 4 a 6 de la tarde. Los panelistas expondrán los vínculos entre la salud pública y el cambio climático, los impactos dispares en las comunidades marginadas, las soluciones climáticas que se están desarrollando en Connecticut y las acciones que se pueden tomar en su comunidad local. Vaya a ctclimatecrisismobilization.org/events para inscribirse. El foro se ofrecerá interpretación simultánea al español.